This is the complete step-by-step guide on how to build a fire gaming PC using the Corsair AIR 5400 case in this stealthy black color. By the end of this video, you'll have the confidence to build your very own as I walk you through each step. Now, the Corsair AIR 5400 comes in black or white with two pre-installed fan options to choose from, LXR or RSR. But in this video, I'll be swapping those out for the Lian Li wireless fans. All the components will be listed in the description down below, along with affiliate links that help and support the Firewolf Tech channel. But just the time that you spend watching my videos, commenting, and hopefully subscribing is more than enough to support my channel, so thank you. So starting off with all the components, for the CPU, I'm going with the Ryzen 7 9800 X3D and pairing it up with the MSI Ventus Black 5070 Ti GPU. For the motherboard, I'm going with the MSI MPG X870E Carbon Wi-Fi, and cooling the CPU is the TRYX Panorama 360 with a massive 6.5-inch AMOLED display. For RAM, I went with 48 gigs of the Corsair Dominator Titanium, rest in peace wallet, and then a 2TB Samsung 9100 Pro for the SSD. Powering this build is the MSI A1250GL power supply unit. And if you're planning on switching the pre-installed fans, I recommend getting the cheaper RSR version. The fans I'll be using are the Lian Li Wireless SL Infinity fans, and for extra flair, I'll be adding the Lian Li Wireless Strimer cables for the CPU, GPU, and motherboard. So with all the components out of the way, first thing we're setting up is the motherboard. Now we're ready to set up our motherboard, and the one I'll be using today is going to be the MSI MPG X870E Carbon Wi-Fi, which is a beautiful all-black motherboard that comes with a ton of ports and even has dual Ethernet, which is really awesome. Now in this step, we'll be setting up our CPU, our NVMe SSD, and our RAM. Now starting off with the CPU, go ahead and drop this latch down to the right, pull this latch all the way up, lift the cover up, revealing the socket pins. Next thing you're gonna grab is your CPU. I'll be using the 9800 X3D. I highly recommend opening up your CPU away from the motherboard in case of any type of accidental drops. However, the camera is right on top, so I'll be extra careful. Once you have your CPU, go ahead and locate the triangle on the top left, which will match up with the triangle on the top left of your socket, as well as these notches on the bottom and the top, which also lines up on the actual socket. Once you're ready, gently lower down your CPU. I like to position my CPU all the way to the corner, and then you can go ahead and drop it in. Give it a little nudge, making sure everything is lined up perfectly. Then you can drop the cover down. I recommend placing a hand on the motherboard and drop the latch down. You're gonna have some resistance, but go ahead and push through. And then you can remove this cover away, and now you have your CPU installed. Next component we'll be installing is going to be our RAM. I'll be using the Corsair Dominator Titanium. Right now, RAM prices are through the roof. Hopefully by the time you watch this video, RAM prices have settled down. Now your RAM is going to be installed in this section over here, and most motherboard will have 4 slots. If you're just going to be using 2 sticks of RAM like I am, you just want to populate the 2nd slot and the 4th slot. Next thing you want to do is drop these latches down. So I'll be dropping down the 2nd slot and then the 4th slot. And some motherboards have additional latches on the bottom as well, which you can also push down. In this motherboard particular, we only have latches on the top. Next thing you want to do is grab your RAM. Go ahead and position it close to the middle line, and you want to make sure they line up. You can see this does not line up, but if I were to turn it around, now they line up, so this is the correct orientation, and then you just slide it right on top. Now motherboards with latches on the top only, you're gonna notice your RAM is sticking upwards on the bottom, but you can go ahead and lightly press it down so they could be nice and leveled. And next thing you want to do is push it all the way down. So 2 clicks, one in the bottom and then one on top. Then I'm gonna grab my last RAM, make sure everything is lined up. Slide it right in, push this one gently down, and then 2 clicks. And now we have a RAM successfully installed. Next thing we're installing is our NVMe SSD, and I'll be using the Samsung 9100 Pro. Before we can install our SSD, depending on your motherboard, you may need to use a screwdriver to remove the heatsink covers for your M.2 sockets. The great thing about this MSI Carbon Wi-Fi is that no tools are necessary since we have a simple push and lift mechanism. So all I have to do is push this silver trim and lift this whole heatsink out of the way, revealing my main primary M.2 socket, which is this one over here. For additional M.2 sockets, it'll normally have its own separate heatsink. So on this motherboard, all I have to do is push this silver trim and lift this whole heatsink out of the way. And that's going to reveal 3 additional M.2 sockets. So in total, I can have 4 SSDs. The only thing I recommend for those of you guys that are going to install multiple SSDs is reference your motherboard's user manual, since some of these M.2 sockets and express slots might share bandwidth with your main GPU express slot. All right, with all that out of the way, depending on your motherboard, you may have extra thermal pads on the bottom. In the case of this carbon Wi-Fi, we definitely do. So we do have to remove this sticker on the bottom. Now that we have that removed, you want to line up this notch with this notch right over here. So once you're ready, go ahead and angle your SSD, push that right in. And once that's in, on this motherboard, we have this little black piece here that we just have to lift up. Then you can push your NVMe all the way down and then turn this black piece back to its starting position, and that will lock your NVMe in place. And of course, if you want to install additional NVMe's, you follow the same exact steps. And so once you're done, go ahead and grab your heat sinks. This is going to be the bottom portion. If you have any NVMe's on the bottom, make sure you flip your heatsink around. Also remove these stickers, revealing the thermal pad before you reinstall this here. Since I'm not using any type of NVMe's on the bottom, I'm just going to go ahead and install it again. And then on my main NVMe, the main heatsink over here, this one I want to make sure I remove the sticker. That's going to reveal the thermal pad. And then all we have to do is line it up in an angle, and then you can push that in and you're going to hear a nice little click. Now our motherboard is fully prepped, so go ahead and lay your motherboard and put it to the side. We're now ready to prep up our case. Alright guys, we're now ready to prep up the Corsair AIR 5400 case. We have two glass panels. We have a very large one on here, and we have a smaller one over here. If you want to open up the glass panel, you can reach on the bottom right for the side, and they're basically held by hinges. And you can also do the same for the front glass. In order for us to give us the most space when doing our build, we want to make sure we remove these glass panels by first removing this side glass panel. And so, looking at the back of the case, you're going to see the hinges right over here. There is a screw that we have to unscrew, and depending on your screwdriver, it's not going to go in smoothly, so we do have to remove the top panel first. All we have to do is just push this up, and this whole top piece comes right out. And now with the top panel off, we now have direct access to this top screw over here. So you can go ahead and unscrew that. All right, so with that screw out of the way, go ahead and open up the side glass panel. And then you should be able to just lift this up. Be very careful, by the way. All right, and as you can see, this large side glass panel is completely removed. So go ahead and set it to the side. All right, so the next panel we're going to remove is going to be from the fronts. And we're going to remove this mesh piece first. And you can go ahead and just pull it towards you. This whole piece should come off. And so with that front panel out of the way, we now have access to the hinge for this front glass piece. Do not remove this glass panel, because trying to install this hinge when all these components are on here is a humongous nightmare. And I had to be super creative to try my best to get it to go through. I almost gave up, to be honest. I almost had to like remove most of these components just so I can reattach this hinge. But yeah guys, do not remove this at all. And honestly, since this does open, you still have direct access on the front here just in case. All right, and moving on, going to the back of the case, we're going to remove the back panel, which is also held by a hinge mechanism. And so the screw for that one is going to be right on top over here. So same thing we did with the side glass panel. We're just going to unscrew the top screw of this hinge, and the ridge to grab the back panel is right over here on the bottom left. You just pull it. You should be able to just lift this up. All right, and that comes right out. The next couple of things we're going to do is we're going to remove the airflow ducts, which are being held by these openings over here. And to easily remove this, you're going to notice this tab right over here. All we have to do is just pull this and then tilt it downward, and this whole airflow duct can be removed safely. And for the bottom one, we have this tab over here, and it's going to depend on whether or not you want to have the pre-installed fans that come in this AIR 5400. If you are planning on keeping the bottom fans, then of course you can completely skip this step and move ahead. But since I'm going to be replacing the bottom fans, we're going to start with the tab on the bottom, just lift it up a little bit, tilt it upwards, and this whole portion comes right off. And then to remove the bottom fans, we have a removable bottom fan bracket, which is held by this one screw right over here. All right, with that screw out of the way, we should be able to lift this whole bracket out of the way. And since these bottom fans are already connected, there's connectors that are located inside the case. Just go ahead and pull it. Just to give you guys a close-up on this one, we have a PWM that's being held right over here. And then we have this adjustable RGB that's also connected that we could just unplug. All right, give you a close-up of the two connectors. It's the adjustable RGB and the PWM. And again, this is the RSR version of the case. If you have the LXR, the connector might look a little bit different, but you should be able to pull it out of the way. All right, for now, I'm gonna put the bottom bracket away and we'll touch that again when we're ready to install the bottom fan. So for now, we're gonna leave the bottom bracket completely removed. The next thing I wanna tackle here is going to the back again. And as you can see here, we have this little SSD tray over here, which can also house a hub as well. I believe you have the LXR, it might already be pre-installed for you. It's just held by these two screws over here. And so I'm personally going to just remove them. Now, once I have this removed, the only thing I'm not liking so far is the fact that these two screws are being left. I don't have a way to kind of remove them since they're pretty much bolted on. And so I may have to reinstall that again. But for now, I have a whole ton of space here. If anything, I'll reattach this towards the end to kind of cable manage and hide most of the bulk of the cable. So for now, I'm going to put this to the side. The next step here is removing this clear plastic over here, which is only held by this one screw on the bottom. And so go ahead and grab your screwdriver and unscrew that. We should be able to just lift this up. Let me give you a better angle here. I don't know if you can see it right here, but the plastic, so when you're lifting this plastic up, you'll notice it goes up and you're able to push it outwards. So there's 3 tabs in total, but you should be able to see it. Now, another thing I'm noticing here is that this clear plastic does have the black bristles on top. So you want to just angle it towards the bottom and then you can go ahead and put this to the side. All right, with all that out of the way, our case is finally fully prepared. I will say that this case does have a lot of additional panels that most other cases don't have. You don't necessarily need to remove every single panel, but I personally like to remove as much as I can to give me a clear workspace, making it easier to install my components and also route all the cables. Now, the final thing I will say about this case is that this motherboard tray can actually be removed. So you can actually install the motherboard away from the case. And if you're ever interested in doing that, there's about 4 screws. We have 3 on the bottom and 1 over there. I might be missing another one. And so with those screws out of the way, you can lift this whole bracket out of the way and remove it completely. However, there's really no need for that. And so instead, to install the motherboard, just go ahead and lay your case flat down, just like this, and I'll meet you guys up there. All right, now we're ready to install our motherboard. And the great thing about the AIR 5400 is that it supports back connect motherboards. You see a whole ton of openings all around, and it even supports up to an eATX motherboard. Now we're going to be using the standard ATX motherboard, but you're going to notice 9 standoffs all around the motherboard tray. And so when you're ready, go ahead and grab your motherboard, and you're basically going to line up the standoffs with the holes on your motherboard. And so what I like to do is take my opposite hand on this IO opening over here and gently bring the motherboard down using the opposite hand to guide it. Makes it easier for me to align. And you know you have perfect alignment when you move up and down, it doesn't go anywhere. And so next you can grab your AIR 5400 accessory box, which you'll then locate this small Corsair box. And inside the box, you're gonna find this white pouch. It's gonna include a whole bunch of accessories. You basically wanna locate this bag over here that has all of the motherboard screws, and you're going to locate a total of 9. And once you have your 9, go ahead and screw all 9 motherboard screws all around your motherboard. And for the final screw, depending on the motherboard you have, your main M.2 heatsink might cover the screw holes for that middle screw. So I do have to remove this heatsink momentarily, so that way I can have access to this middle screw point. Thankfully, this motherboard makes it very easy to reinstall the heatsink. All right, now our motherboard's installed, so go ahead and lift up your case. With our motherboard installed, the next step here is to connect the PC panel connectors. So go ahead and rotate your case. Now that we're in the back, the cables are going to be right over here, which are held by Velcro straps here. So go ahead and undo them. All right, and as you're undoing the cables, you might notice these 2 cables coming right off, and these were the original connectors for the bottom fans. And so if you're going to keep the bottom fans, of course you can just keep this connector, but since we're replacing the fans, we're not going to need this, so we can just put that away. And what we're going to focus on are going to be these 4 cables, starting off with our front panel connector that controls the power button on the case. You're going to route this cable on the bottom left into the very small channel. You should be able to push the front panel right in, and just go ahead and grab that wire. We'll connect that later. The next cable is our HD audio, and that controls the 3.5mm audio jack on the case. And so we're going to route this on the bottom right. All right, next cable is going to be our USB-A connector, and that's going to be the thickest one. Reference your motherboard's manual to know where the positioning of your USB-A connector is. Most of them are going to be on the middle towards the left, but on this motherboard it's going to be positioned on this section over here. So I'm going to route this cable right over here in this little channel. Now this connector is thick, but it should still fit. So I'm just going to push that through. All right, and for our final cable is going to be the USB-C connector, and as long as you have a modern motherboard that comes with this connector, you can use this. If your motherboard doesn't have it, then you can go ahead and ignore this cable. And so I'm going to route this right over here on this motherboard. That's where the USB-C connector is at. All right, and now that we have all 4 cables passed through, let's go ahead and rotate the case. All right, so we should be able to see all 4 cables pass through. Now on this particular MSI Carbon Wi-Fi motherboard, most of the connectors have a right angle, which is going to make it a little bit difficult to connect these cables. Most motherboards will have the connector facing upwards, which will probably be easier to connect. Reference your motherboard's manual, but the first connector we're going to start off with is going to be our USB-C. All right, after a couple attempts, it is really hard to connect this. So I'm going to have to momentarily remove this anti-GPU sag bracket so that way I can connect the USB-C and the USB-A connector because we have that right angle. So if you're having those type of struggles like I am, thankfully we should be able to remove the anti-sag bracket by first unscrewing this screw right over here. And once you remove the screw, the anti-GPU sag bracket can be easily removed, so it's only one screw holding it in place. And so with that out of the way, we should have a whole ton of space now to connect, and I should be able to fit that anti-GPU sag bracket back in. Hopefully on your motherboard, you don't have to make that adjustment, but thankfully we're able to remove that bracket just in case. Push that cable in. So now the USB-C is connected. I'm gonna try to push this cable as inward as possible because remember we're gonna put the anti-sag bracket again. And then the next one here is going to be our USB-A connector, and that on this motherboard is going to be right over here. We actually have 2 USB-A connectors, and so we can plug this on either or. Make sure you match up the notch. Push that in. Now USB-A is in, and we're going to tuck these cables, like I said earlier, as much as inward as possible. And now what I'm going to do is reattach the anti-GPU bracket, and you should be able to just hook this back in right over here. Then let's see if this screw, okay, so the screw for this bracket is actually right behind the connector, if you can see there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from the top, kind of slide it from behind. All right, so we definitely have an extreme bend, but we still have contact with the connector. And we're going to rotate the case again, and we're going to reattach that screw. All right, I have that screwed back in. And once we flip that over, you're going to see the USB-C connector is shifted a little bit downward. This bracket was just a little bit higher. This would sit perfectly flush. Now it's still connected, so the USB-C on top of the case should still work. If it doesn't, I'll let you guys know. Now the next cable we're going to work on is going to be our front panel connector, and that's going to be located on the bottom right of your motherboard. The front panel connector has 9 pins with 1 missing, so make sure you match up that missing pin. In this case, on this motherboard, it's on the top right. So I'm just going to line that up and connect that through. Now front panel is connected. We're going to tuck these cables in. All right, last cable is going to be our HD audio, and that is connected on the bottom left of your motherboard. Again, reference your motherboard's manual. And similar to the front panel, we have 9 missing pins in a different location. So just make sure you match up that missing pin. Just line it up and connect that through. And just tuck these cables inward. All right, perfect. All right, guys, to give you guys a close-up, once again, we have that USB-C connector, followed by the USB-A. Then we have the front panel connector on the bottom right. And finally, the HD audio on the bottom left. All right, now we're ready to install some fans on our case. We're going to be installing 3 on the bottom, 3 on the top as well. And if you remember earlier, the AIR 5400 comes with 3 pre-installed fans with 2 different versions. This is the RSR version. They also have an LXR version as well. However, in this build, we're going to be replacing these fans with the Lian Li SL Infinity wireless fans. And I'll show you exactly how that works. And so the first thing we're going to do is remove these fans from the bottom fan bracket. There's a total of 12 screws, so go ahead and unscrew all 12. All right, with all 12 screws out of the way, I can remove all of these fans. And now we have the bottom fan bracket completely empty, so that way you can put whatever fan you want. Now, if you're going to go for the SL Infinity fans for the bottom, you want to make sure you pick up the reverse blade. And I do recommend picking up the 3-pack of the reverse blade because it will include this SATA to 3-way PWM power splitter, which I highly recommend you use, and also an L wireless controller. You only need to use one. And so once you open up your SL Infinity fans, they're going to come individual like this. And all you have to do to connect them, match up the tabs with the opening over here. And then you can just interlock them. Then you grab the third one, do the same thing, and interlock. And now we have 3 fans daisy chained together, which shares one power connector. The next thing you want to do is rotate the fans on the back, and you're going to remove these corner tab pieces that come right off. That reveals a screw hole, so make sure you remove all the corner tab pieces on the back. Now that we have our corner tab pieces removed, we're now ready to install it on the bottom bracket. But for the SL Infinity fans, the wireless one specifically has 2 mirror design. We have the first one over here, which is a tapered design. And on the opposite side, we have a rectangle design. So it's up to you to decide which one of these patterns you want to basically showcase when you're looking at it at the front. So I'm personally going to go for the tapered design. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to grab the bottom fan bracket and we're going to place these fans right on top. And then you're going to flip it over and you're going to screw in all of the case fan screws that you just removed earlier, and you're going to attach it to this bottom fan bracket. All right, I have all 12 screws screwed in, and this is basically how it's going to look. The next step here is to attach our Air wireless receiver that you get in that 3-pack or single packs as well. And this connector can be connected on either side, on the left side or on the right side. Since there's an opening channel right over here, I want to make sure we hide the cable as best as we can. So I'm going to attach the connector on the left side. So all you have to do is locate these little pins over there, place the receiver right on top. And then once you place it on top, go ahead and push it to the right. Just like that. And that is now locked in. And the good thing about having the taper design is that the direction of the cable is going into the case, which is exactly what we want. If you're going to be using the rectangle side instead, you might have to change the positioning of this wire, but you can easily do that by removing the top of this receiver, which pops right out, and switching the cable to the other side. However, I don't need to do that, so I'm going to put this top back in, but you can definitely switch that orientation if you need to. And the final step before we put the fans in is on the opposite side where we don't have the connector, we have these pins exposed. So inside the box, Lian Li does give you this cover as well. So that way we can cover up these pins to prevent any type of shorts or anything like that that can come into contact. You just never know. So go ahead and place it in, push it to the left so it's locked into place. So those pins are not going to be in contact with anything. And that's just a precaution that I highly recommend you put. And Lian Li does recommend as well. All right, so now we're ready to position the bottom fan bracket on the case. And just as a reminder, the screw hole is on the right side. That's how you know that's the correct way. We're first going to feed this connector in this small little channel right on the bottom left corner of the case. We're just going to pass that wire in. I'm going to reach for it on the opposite side. All right, so most of the cable is already on the other side. Next thing you want to do is you want to lift this up, the GPU sag bracket, and then you're just going to slide in. There's the 2 tabs is right on the bottom left. And the screw hole should line up. And so that screw hole is going to be right over here. It should line up. So go ahead and screw that in. Now we have the bottom fans installed. For now, I'm not going to install the plastic air duct because I want to make sure we have as much space as possible to connect the remaining pieces. Now, since we have the wires of the bottom fans on the back of the case, let's go ahead and connect that real quick before we proceed to the next fan. I am right on the back of the case. You should notice 2 connectors. The one that's furthest away is going to be the main one, followed by a second one. Both of these have 4-pin openings. However, the main one, if you look at it on the back, you'll notice that you see 4 silver trims. And if I were to rotate the other one, this one only has 2 trim. This one is going to be for supplementary power, which is going to eventually connect to this connector over here that I showed you earlier. And this is available in a 3-pack. And this basically gives you additional power to the wireless fans to make sure that they work properly. Now, the main one, which has these 4 pins, we can connect this directly to a motherboard fan header. You could also connect this to a fan hub if you want to do that. I personally like to just connect this straight to the motherboard and then eventually connect these to the supplementary power to that SATA 3-way connector. And so if you're going to follow that, I'm going to position this cable right on the bottom. Your motherboard should have multiple fan headers throughout the case, from the bottom to the sides, even to the top. But we're going to push this to the bottom, just the main connector. We're going to flip that real quick. All right, and we should see that cable right over here. And reference your manual's layout so you know where all the fan headers are. They basically just have 4 pins with a tab on the bottom. And so in the example of this motherboard, we have one over here, another one over here, a third one, and it looks like we only have 3 on the bottom. We have more on the top of the motherboard as well, and even on the side here as well. So every motherboard is different. You should have several fan headers. So I'm just going to connect it right over here. And just make sure you match up the tab with the tab on the fan header. And go ahead and connect that in. Now I have the bottom fans connected. All right, the next set of fans that we're going to work on is going to be our top fans. And just like the bottom fans that has a removable bracket, the top also has a removable bracket as well. So the screw for the top bracket is right over here. There's only one screw that's holding the top bracket. So go ahead and unscrew that. And with that screw out of the way, this whole top piece comes off very smoothly. Now the fans that you're going to install on the top are going to be exhaust fans. Make sure you pick up standard blade or normal blade. Remember, the bottoms are reverse blade. These are the ones that's intaking cold air, and the normal ones will be pushing air that way, so it's going to be exhausting hot air out. You could pick up the standard blade also in a 3-pack as well, but you really only need 1 3-pack in total. You could get individual ones if you want to, or just simply get another 3-pack, whichever one is available and easier for you. Now, just like the bottom fans, we do have to remove the corner tab pieces on the back. So go ahead and remove all 12 of them. Now that I've removed all the corner tab pieces from the back of the fan, the next thing you want to decide on is, again, which design, whether you want to do the tapered or the rectangle. I'm going to follow the bottom, so I'm going to go with the same tapered design. And so next you're going to grab your top bracket. Remember, the screw hole is going to be on the right side, and this bracket goes right on top. And so when you put it on, it should look just like this. And just like we did on the bottom fan bracket, we have a total of 12 holes. And inside the box of your SL Infinity fans, you will get a set of case fan screws, 4 for each fan. And you're going to go ahead and screw in all 12 in. All right, now I have all 12 case fan screws on the top bracket. Another visual cue that I like about this bracket here is that you'll notice these little circles all over the bracket. And this serves as a really nice alignment. So that way you can line up the holes where the circle is at, and then you can screw it in. And that way, it keeps it directly in the middle. So I like that visual cue. The next step is to install our L wireless receiver. And since we want to hide the cables, we want the cables to go on the left side. So same thing as we did on the bottom, we're going to put the connector on the left side. So go ahead and grab your L wireless receiver, place it on top of the pins. And then you push it to the left. So that way you can lock it in. Now, since we're using the tapered design, the direction of this cable is on the opposite side. So in this case, we're going to remove this top piece from the receiver, and we're going to move the cable to the other side. All right, just like this. And then we can just reattach the top piece, just like that. And now the direction of the cable is facing inside the case. And finally, don't forget to attach this cover for the opposite side. That way we can protect it just in case. Push that right in. And now we're ready to attach the fans. And so the bracket is going to go to the top. And we want to first pass this cable right here in the middle. And then you can literally pass this cable right over here in this little opening here. And then you can start lowering the top bracket and then just angle it back in. And just to give you guys a quick look, you want to make sure you match the tab pieces right on the opening and in a slight angle. And then you can place this right over the screw hole. And then make sure you screw in the top bracket. All right, now we have our top 3 fans installed. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to tackle the cable. So go ahead and flip the cable. Flip the case on the opposite side. You should see the cable right over here. And once again, we're going to grab the main connector. This is the one that has the 4 silver pins. And once again, the other one only has 2. So we want to make sure we connect this one to the motherboard or a hub if you want to use it. In this case, since these fans are located on the top, I'm going to use one of the fan headers on the top of the motherboard, which is going to be right over here. I'm going to pass again the main one right over here. pass that through real quick. Rotate the case again. All right, and we have a whole bunch of fan headers on the top right of the motherboard. So I'm just gonna use a system fan, which could be this one, or I can use this one. I'm just gonna use this system fan right over here. And if you don't have fan headers on the top right of the motherboard, you could also connect it to a different fan header around the case. You just have to locate your fan headers. All right, and that's our top fan connected to the motherboard. So before we move on to the next step, I do want to touch upon the rear fan options you have with the Corsair AIR 5400. You are able to install a 120mm fan right on the rear. However, you are going to need special brackets in order for you to install a 120mm fan on this case that you could screw in to your case fan with case fan screws, of course. And once you align the bracket from the top and the bottom, you can then, I'm going to take this off real quick, you can then position this on the back like this and be able to screw in smaller size screws to mount a 120mm fan on the back. Now, keep in mind, I'm going to angle this case here. If you want to add a rear fan, it's going to stick out. The curved glass starts over here. And so this will basically throw off the natural aesthetics of the Corsair AIR 5400, since it's basically designed to have maximum airflow flowing in from the bottom all the way to the top. So adding a rear fan is not really necessary, and it's not going to impact the temperatures of the case. It is purely up to you if you want to add a rear fan. I'm personally not going to install a rear fan, and you can always come back and add it on later or remove it if you don't want it anymore. All right, so the next major component that we're going to install is going to be our CPU cooler. Now, TRYX was kind enough to send me their 360 Panorama AIO, which comes with a very large 6.5-inch curved AMOLED display. This is definitely a really nice AIO. And so we're going to go ahead and start prepping up our AIO. And before we open up the Panorama, the great thing about the AIR 5400, besides the fact that it has that separate chamber, is that this whole radiator bracket can be removed with simple screws on the top. We have one over here. And the final screw is going to be on the right side, which is this one right over here. And with those two screws out of the way, as you can see here, I'd be very careful with that second screw. You can easily remove this. So that way we can attach the AIO on the bracket and easily position that. So make sure you have this to the side. And now let's open up our AIO. All right, so let's go ahead and open up our AIO. We're definitely going to need our radiator and pump, of course. Go ahead and pull those out. All right, and you're also going to notice these two boxes. The one that we're really going to need is going to be this one over here, which has like all these bracket systems. This one we can ignore. All right, let's go ahead and pull the sleeve off. I really like how TRYX packages their Panorama, very premium. So as you can tell, the TRYX Panorama does have 3 pre-installed fans on the radiator. Most AIOs come with 3 fans. Some of them are pre-installed like you see here. Some of them are not pre-installed, but they come in a box. Since we're going to be using the SO Infinity fans, we do have to remove these fans first. And one important note about installing this AIO on the Corsair AIR 5400 is that the AIO gets mounted on the side instead of traditionally on the top. And so if your AIO comes with 3 fans, pre-installed or not, the fans that usually come inside the box are set to exhaust. And so if you wanted to use the same fans that come with your AIO, you would have to remove the fans, flip them, and have them installed on the opposite side so that they're intaking cold air. If you're going to pick up the Infinity fans, make sure you pick up reverse blades, because the reverse blades will basically go like this. So it is intaking cold air inside. All right, so with all those details out of the way, since these fans are pre-installed, we do have to unscrew all of these screws, a total of 12. So go ahead and unscrew them if you want to replace the fans. All right, with these screws out of the way, we can now remove the TRYX fans out of the way. And we're all going to have to flip the radiator on the opposite side. So opposite of the tubes is where we're going to install the fans. We're going to grab our Infinity fans. We're going to remove the tabs from the top and also from the back. So it's going to be a lot of tabs that we got to remove. Now I have the corner tab pieces removed from the top and the back as well. This way, whenever I use the radiator screws, it can actually pass through. So the next step here is, of course, positioning our fans on the actual radiator itself, which is going to be opposite to where the tubes are at. So it's going to be a little bit tricky to mount this since the AIO tubes can make it a little bit wobbly. One thing I do recommend if you're on a table is have the tubes on the bottom and just let the whole pump kind of fall. and have the radiator against the table. So I'm just gonna move the camera downward a little bit so you can see what I'm talking about. So most of the tube is on the bottom, and this just makes it easier for me to just line this up. Last thing here, before we start screwing everything in, is we are gonna have to grab our bracket. You wanna locate the bottom, which is gonna be where the two tabs are at. Because the tubes are already on the bottom, we wanna make sure the bottom tab pieces is facing the opposite side. So once you know that, go ahead and start aligning everything. I would probably first align the fans first, and then you can put the bracket over. One final note is that we also have circles right there all around, indicating where the screws should go. So I think I'm gonna follow that. And then once you're ready, go ahead and grab your radiator screws, and then you should be able to screw that right in. It might be a little bit difficult to see the holes. Now you might come across an issue where the radiator screws that come with the AIO is not long enough to accommodate this bracket. And that's because the SL Infinity fans also have these rubber pieces on top as well that add a little bit of thickness. And so if you ever run into that issue, you are going to use longer radiator screws. And just to give you a size comparison, you can see these are much longer. I'll link these radiator screws as well, just in case if you come across a scenario where you just need to have longer radiator screws. So with this, I should be able to now screw it in with no issues. Yep, definitely am able to screw it in. Much easier now. I was not able to screw it in. For now, I'm just going to use these longer screws. All right, guys, I now have that screwed in. I actually only had 8 long screws, so for now I put 4 on each side, which is more than enough to hold all these fans since these are interlocked anyways. And so now your AIO should basically look like this, with the tubes facing to the right, the bracket on the left side, with the fan being sandwiched between the bracket and the radiator itself. The next thing we're going to do is attach our L wireless receiver, and I am going to attach that right on the top where the top of the tubes are at. So I'm going to connect that right over here, lock that in place. I also want to make sure the wire is facing that side as well, and then make sure you rotate the back of these fans and utilize, and don't forget to use this piece to cover the opposite side, these pins over here. Just go ahead and place that over and lock it in place. That way everything is nice and protected, just in case. And finally, before you place the AIO inside the case, if your AIO has a removable screen or a module like this, go ahead and remove it to give us the most space possible. And so now we're ready to put this on the case. You're gonna first slowly pass the pump over here. So there's a really good opening. Just go ahead and gently grab your pump. You might have a really large pump or it might be small, but once it's over here, you can lay it down safely. But also make sure that the wires for the Infinity fans are positioned upward as well. You can move this more towards the back. And then once you're ready, pick up your AIO. You're going to put it in an angle, put the bottom tabs right in that opening. Depending on the size of your radiator and the tubes, it may be a little bit difficult to squeeze it in like it is here. And so once again, depending on your AIO, it might be in close contact with this, but I should still be able to push it through, just being really gentle, of course. So just like that, as you can see, it definitely pushed through. If it's too tight, double check the positioning of your screws. You may have to lower your radiator down to make enough space. But now, as you can see, the screws now line up. And so we're gonna screw that in. And the final one, which is over here. All right, once our AIO is installed in the case, I'm gonna go over the biggest challenge that you might face, and that is this clear plastic piece that basically creates the third chamber, preventing all of the hot air from the radiator going into the main chamber. And because of this piece, it's gonna be a little bit difficult to install it, especially when you have your bottom and top fans installed. I did have previously my pump installed here as well, and I was not really able to install this clear plastic without having to force it in and potentially breaking it. So the easiest way that I personally found installing this piece is that once you have your AIO installed, go ahead and unscrew the bottom fan bracket and the top fan bracket. It's just 2 screws. So we have the first one over here and the screw on the top. And then just momentarily with the top fan bracket, just lift this up and place the fan on top of the case, just slightly. And with the bottom bracket, just lift it up just a little bit and just push it to the side. We don't really have to disconnect anything. This just makes it easier for me to just push it in. Another challenge that we are going to face as well is reinstalling the front glass. But without that front glass, it does make it easier for me to position this clear plastic inside. And so go ahead and locate this portion of the clear plastic where the screw goes into. This is the direction you're going to go inward. I would recommend going in a slight angle with the brushes on top, and then just gently start placing the plastic on the case. So once we're here, what makes this difficult to squeeze in is the AIO tubes, and a lot of it's going to depend on what type of AIO you're using, how thick these tubes are, how flexible they are. In this scenario, I have the most difficult combinations right now, so you want to basically grab these tubes, lift it as high up as possible. You should be able to now slide this in easier, and you want to locate these 3 tabs, and these 3 tabs we're eventually going to have to slide in on the side. So I'm going to continue pushing this along. All right, so I switch up the angle so I can show you these 3 tabs that are going to go inside over here. You basically lift it up, push a tab in, and slide it down. And so you may need to grab these tubes, lift them up as high up as you can, which should then allow you to lift up the clear plastic just like this. Now you should be able to drop it down just like that. Okay. All right, so that finally dropped in. All right, and looking at it from the back, the tab should automatically fall into that little hole, and this screw should line up now. And you're going to grab the yellow tip screw that we removed earlier, and we're going to screw that in, and that will basically now lock this clear plastic. And then next we're going to reinstall our fan brackets here, and don't forget the top bracket, of course. And now that we have our top and bottom fans reattached, the reason why I said that this particular AIO is the worst combination for the AIR 5400 is because we have this beautiful 6.5-inch OLED display. And the correct orientation for this to be effective is basically having the curved OLED display this way. Now, TRYX does have an SE version of this that supports multiple different orientation where you can put the display like this to the left, which gives you more freedom to basically install this right on top, for example. But because of this AMOLED display only having a right angle orientation, I have to position these tubes on the bottom. So for most other AIOs where you don't have that type of issue, you could just simply have the tubes facing on the left side to make it the most aesthetic possible by being able to hide the tubes. But in the case of the TRYX Panorama, I actually have to rotate all these tubes to the bottom. Don't be afraid to rearrange the tubes, of course. Basically like this, where the tubes are now on the bottom. So that way, when I attach this top screen, it is now facing on the right angle. This also has an integrated VRM fan, so that's going to be blowing in the right direction as well. The only other additional con about this is that the tubes might end up blocking a little bit of the RGB strips from your RAM if you have RGB lighting. But that's pretty much what I had to do to make this happen. So with all of that out of the way, we are now ready to lay the case flat down. Keep in mind that the videos you're going to see are going to show the plastic not installed yet. So just make sure you install this before you proceed to the next step. And I recommend you position the pump closer to the motherboard so that way it's not flying when you drop it down. So go ahead and gently lower it down, and I'll meet you guys up there. All right, before we can install our pump directly onto the CPU, we first have to remove the original retention bracket, which are these 2 black pieces. So I'm going to grab a screwdriver and unscrew all 4 screws. And with those screws removed, we can lift these 2 black pieces out of the way. Go ahead and locate your TRYX box to have all of these brackets. And the one you want to look for is the one that says AMD adapter bracket, which has these 2 plastic pieces. Each one of them have CPU labeled on them with the arrow indicating where the CPU should be. So since this arrow is facing upwards, this will be positioned on the bottom. And then the other one with the CPU arrow pointing downward is of course going to be on top. And then place it right on top of the screw holes. Now for the TRYX Panorama, we are going to reuse the same 4 screws that were holding the original retention bracket to screw these brackets in. All right, now that's in nice and tight. And before we place the pump over the CPU, depending on your AIO, you may have pre-installed thermal paste, but some AIOs might not have thermal paste. And if that's the case, you will have to use thermal paste, but the thermal paste is to be installed on top of the CPU. Apply a pea-sized amount or draw a letter X, something like that is more than enough. But thankfully, the Panorama does have that pre-installed thermal paste, so we can just remove this plastic and place it on top of our CPU. Now, one crucial feature that you need to know, the TRYX Panorama, of course, has this 6.5-inch curved screen. They have a different version, which is the SE, that gives you multiple different orientations to put the screen. If the tubes are facing up and you put the panorama screen, the curved is going to be on the opposite side. If you try to put the pump this way, it's going to make the screen completely upside down. Another selling point of this is that it has a VRM fan, so the VRM fan is not going to work at all. So the only correct way to have the OLED display oriented in the correct way is to have these tubes on the bottom. Again, this is going to be unique for the Panorama 360. The SE, you have more flexibility on different positioning. So in this case, I'm going to have to flip the tubes, have the tubes running more downwards, and kind of switching the orientation of these tubes to the right a little bit. And now the tubes are now facing on the bottom. So that way, when we install the curved display, it now shows the curved on this side. And that's the correct orientation for the TRYX Panorama. All right, should be able to lift the tubes. All right, so now I'm going to screw in the 4 screws to see how everything fits. All right, so now I have all 4 screws screwed in. All right, so before I put that screen, this cable right over here is the AIO pump header. And all AIOs will have a 4-pin or a 3-pin pump header, and that normally goes on the top right of your motherboard in a dedicated AIO pump header. In the case of the Carbon Wi-Fi, that's going to be this one in the middle, which is coated in white. Some motherboards might not have a dedicated AIO pump header. In that case, you could just use CPU fan instead if you wanted to. However, since we do have a dedicated AIO pump, that's going to be right over here. And so I'm just going to quickly connect that real quick right over here in that pump header, and I'm going to tuck these cables inward so that way it's concealed as much as possible. All right, and now we can grab our OLED screen, and I'm going to locate this USB cable, and I'm going to pass this cable right over here because we're going to run that behind the case, and we're going to connect that. All right, and now we're going to position the screen over. Remember, this opening over here is where the tubes are at, and that's how it magnetically snaps, which is perfect. And this, I'm going to try my best to hide it as best as I can. Now let's connect that USB connector and our connectors on the fans that are attached to the AIO. So go ahead and lift up your case. All right, and we should see that USB cable that we just passed through, which is this one over here. And the USB on your motherboard are almost always going to be right on the bottom over here towards the middle. So I'm going to pass that through on the bottom middle. And then for the fans attached to the radiator, this is going to be the main connector that has that 4 silver trim. As a reminder, the 2 trim here, that's for supplementary power. We'll connect that later. We want to focus on this one over here. Since the cable is on the top, I have additional fan headers on the top of the motherboard, so I'm going to pass that right on top of there. All right, and with those 2 cables passed through, let's go ahead and rotate the case again. All right, and starting with the USB connector, that's going to be connected on either one of these USB ports. Most motherboards have 2 USBs. You could always reference a user manual. And this motherboard, you can actually read where it says USB. And this connector has 9 open pins with 1 missing. So make sure you match that up. In this case, the missing pin is on the bottom right. So go ahead and line that up and connect that through. And that's going to connect the screen of the TRYX Panorama. And then if we look up over here, this was the fan connector for the fans attached to the radiator. And I have another fan header right on the corner over here, or I can connect it to the top left, which is labeled CPU fan. I'm just going to connect it to CPU fan since technically it is connected to the radiator. It doesn't really matter. You can connect this to a system fan header or CPU fan. It will both work perfectly fine. All right, perfect. So now we have our USB connected on the bottom and that additional fan connected to the CPU fan. All right, the next thing I want to install is going to be our Lian Li L wireless controller. Since we're using wireless fans and eventually wireless trimmers, they all utilize the same controller. If you remember earlier, all these receivers that we attach on each set of these fans, those are wireless receivers, and that gets connected wirelessly through this controller. And this can be found in any 3-pack of the wireless fans, or you can purchase this individually as well. But as long as you get a 3-pack, all you need is just one. Now, the great thing about this is that there's 2 ways to connect this. You can connect it via USB, so you can connect it to the back of the motherboard, for example, and you're pretty much good to go. Or my preferred method would be to install it inside the case, so that way we don't have this big thing sticking outside. And so the controller has an additional cable, which is this one over here. This connects to the controller, and we have two connectors. We have a USB and we have a 4-pin fan header. So to make this as easy as possible, since everything is nice and open, we're going to first connect the USB to an open USB port on our motherboard, which is right next to the one that we just connected for the screen. So once again, we're just going to connect that real quick. And then for this fan header here, this is optional, but I'm going to go ahead and install it anyways. I'm just going to install that on an open fan header, which is one right over here. I can also install it here as well. So I'm going to go ahead and plug that in right next to the USB. Actually, it's easier for me. All right, so now that we have those two connected, I'm just going to pass this cable back inside the case, and then let's rotate the case. All right, and that connector is right over here, and we're going to connect that to our wireless controller. All right, so that is connected, and for now I'm going to place this on the bottom of the case, and we'll find a suitable home for that once we start tackling the cable management of the case. And while we're still back here, now will be the perfect opportunity to install our power supply unit. And the one I'll be using today is going to be the MSI MAG A1250GL power supply unit. And so the PSU gets installed right on top of here. And you want to make sure the fan is facing outward. That way it is intaking cold air from outside the case. And finally, you want to make sure the AC input is facing outside of the case. And once you're ready, go ahead and move any of the wires out of the way and just gently place it on top. There are some rubber feet on top that you can easily slide in. All right, and I'm going to slide this over here so you can see the screw holes. Then you're going to grab your PSU screws, screw them right into the screw holes that you see over here. All right, now that all 4 screws are screwed in, our PSU is now mounted successfully on the back of the case, and we're now ready to start connecting our power supply cables. And inside the box of your PSU, you should have a bag with a whole bunch of cables, and so I'm going to show you which ones you're going to need for your build. All right, and these are the cables you're going to look for. You're going to look for your CPU power connector, which should have a CPU label. Our motherboard actually uses 2 of these cables, so we're going to reserve 2 on the side for now. You're also going to locate your motherboard ATX power connector, and this is going to be the largest connector. It's very easy to find. You're next going to find your SATA power connectors, and they're the ones that have these type of connectors. Most of these cables come with 4 attached, and it has like this little 6-pin here, and this is used to eventually connect supplemental power. Or if you have a different AIO, a lot of AIOs with screens might also use SATA power as well, so we're going to be using one of these. And the final cables that you're going to need are going to be your GPU power connector. Since I'm using the MSI 5070 Ti, all I have to use is just this 12-volt high power connector. If you're going to be using a separate GPU that doesn't use that, you would use PCIe power connectors, and your GPU might use 1, 2, 3, or maybe even up to 4. So I want to first start connecting the CPU and the motherboard, so we're going to rotate our case. Now that we're in the front of the case, I'm actually going to be using Lian Li wireless cables, and these are basically extension cables that extend the original power supply cables. And this is completely optional, but we're first going to start off with the CPU. And this trimmer cable over here is specifically made for CPU power connectors. It has the 2 8-pins that we're going to use to connect to our motherboard. Now, if you're not going to use the trimmers, you would just basically grab your CPU power connectors, again, that are labeled CPU, and your CPU power connectors go on the top left of the motherboard. Your motherboard might use just 1 8-pin connector, or in this case, I'm using 2. Some motherboards might even have a combination of 8 pins and 4. And so all you have to do is keep the tab on top and then just connect it right in. But since I'll be using the streamers instead, I'm going to connect the streamers first, which is going to be this end over here. This is where the CPU power connector is going to be connected to. And so same thing here, the top, we're going to have the tops facing upwards, and we're going to connect both of these in. Should click in very smoothly. And then I'm going to bend this, and we're going to pass this right on that top channel. There's plenty of space here to squeeze that in, and go ahead and reach for that cable on the opposite side. All right, so that is in. The next cable we're going to connect is our motherboard power connector, and the one that goes on the motherboard is going to be the larger 24-pin connector. In that case, connected right over here. You would just have the tab on the right side, and then you can connect that. But once again, we're going for the streamer version, so that's going to be this connector over here, and you want to use this top over here. One thing to note here, I swapped the black clip with the white clip. I don't have the black clip anymore. I threw that away by mistake, but I have another one coming, so I'll be swapping this out for a black clip instead. So you're going to notice this eventually change to black. Now, since our TRYX Panorama needed to be installed this way to have the tubes on the bottom, It might be a little bit difficult to squeeze that in, but it'll definitely fit. If you're using a different AIO, your tubes will most likely not be in the way. So just be gentle, keep the tab on the right side, and we're just going to connect that right in. You're gonna hear a nice little click. I'm gonna also bend this, and we're going to pass that right over here, right on top of the tubes. And one thing I like about the strimmer is that it does hide a portion of that AIO tube, which should look really nice. All right, so now let's rotate the case, and we should now see the CPU strimmer here and the motherboard strimmer right over here. Or if you're not using these cables, you should see the other end of your cables as well. And so starting off with the CPU, I'm gonna connect this to the CPU strimmer. Make sure you're connecting the CPU end on this portion of the strimmer. And that's 2. All right, to give you a different angle so it's easier for me to show you where these get connected. All of our power supply unit connectors are gonna be on this side over here with labels indicating what each one of them are. For the CPU connectors, you're going to look for the label that says CPU, which almost every power supply unit will have it labeled as CPU/PCIe. So you're able to connect your CPU to any one of those CPU/PCIe connector. Okay, that's the first one. All right, second one is in. And we're going to position these CPU connectors on the top. There's Velcro straps right over here that I'm going to use. All right, so I was able to use this top Velcro strap to have the bulk of the CPU cable on top. Since we're using the strimmer extension cables, there's a lot of extra CPU wiring, of course, so it might be a little bit tricky to have everything bundled up over here. Now, before we put our motherboard connector into the PSU, I want to first connect the SATA power connector because we need to connect these supplementary power for our fans. And once I put the motherboard cable here, it's going to be very chaotic at that point, making it more difficult. And so as I said towards the beginning of the video, when I first started covering the fans, whenever you order a 3-pack of the wireless infinity fans, you will also receive one of these. This is a SATA to 3-way PWM connectors. And you'll notice these have just 2 silver pins that match up directly with the 2 silver pins on each of these tail ends of these SL Infinity fans. And the reason why I want to install this is because it gives you supplementary power from the PSU, ensuring that these fans work the best. And so before we connect our SATA, let's go ahead and connect all the SL Infinity fans. So you should have 2 on top hanging around, which are for the radiator and the top fans. And then your last one should be towards the bottom somewhere. Where are you? Right over here. Found it. All right, so let's go ahead and connect these. Should just match up the tabs. All right, that's 1. That's 2. And our final one is right over here. Perfect. Now we have all of these 3 connected, and they all share the same SATA power connector. So now that we have that installed, we're now ready to plug in our SATA connector to our PSU. And this uses 6-pin, and on your power supply unit, you're going to look for the label that says SATA. You might also see this say SATA and Molex. So you can connect this in any one of these connectors. So I'm going to connect that right over here. All right. All right, so that SATA adapter will now get connected to any one of these open SATA connectors. There's a total of 4. Some PSUs might have single ones, which would probably be convenient, but we only need to use one of these. And if you're using a different AIO, you might also connect that SATA power to one of these as well. Again, it all depends on which AIO you're using. If it has a screen, the Panorama doesn't need that, so we're pretty much good to go. And so I'm just going to quickly tuck all of these inside the case. All right, now you're ready to tackle our motherboard connector. And once again, I'm using the strimmer, which is over here. If you're not using the strimmer, then this portion would be sticking out. So for the strimmer, I'm going to route this in this little opening over here. It's like a opening. I'm going to pass that through real quick. So that connector is now over here. And we're going to connect the largest connector directly to our motherboard strimmer. All right, that is now connected. And now you're going to connect these 2 directly into your PSU that is labeled ATX. And they're very easy to spot because they're the only connectors that are completely different from the rest. And so on this MSI power supply, the connectors are going to be this one and this one over here. All right, first one is connected. And the final one, All right, so now our motherboard is connected, and these are the two connectors that I just connected. And these wires, we can just leave them like this. All right, and the last power connector is going to be our GPU power. And once again, I'll be using a 12-volt high power connector since the 5070 Ti uses this connector. And on this PSU, that connector is going to be on the top right over here. Make sure you connect this connector all the way through. And so I'm eventually going to be using the strimmer cable, but if you're not going to be using strimmer, you can go ahead and route this cable towards the bottom. Then you can reach for it on the bottom. It's a little bit, could be a little bit tricky, but should be able to pull that through. All right, so that's all the power supply cables that we need to connect to the PSU. And now we're ready for the final components. So go ahead and rotate your case around. All right, before we proceed, now would be a perfect time to reinstall the air ducts on the bottom and the top. So starting off with the bottom one, you're gonna grab the bottom duct. So all you have to do is match these two tabs. They're gonna go on the side of the case, and pay attention to your GPU sag bracket because you are gonna have to lift it up just a little bit to make some space. So we're gonna place that right on top. And you're gonna notice all of these little tabs as well. You're just gonna mash that all up. All right, and of course we want to make sure this tab is perfectly installed on the right side. And for the last one, this is going to be our top air duct. I will say that it's going to be a challenge with the top fans in this position. So I do recommend unscrewing the top bracket again. Lift this up and put the fans to the side to make it easier for you to squeeze in. And so once those top fans are out of the way, you can easily start positioning this. Before I put in, you want to focus these two tabs in these two openings over here, and it'll definitely fit even with the strimmer. All right, once we push that in, we can start slowly pushing these in, and finally you're gonna hear a nice little click on the right side. And now our top air duct is fully installed. And now we can reattach the top bracket. Go ahead and drop that in and make sure you screw that back in. And hopefully that's the last time we ever have to remove the top bracket. And as you can see here, the CPU streamers are still visible. All right, and now we're finally ready to install our GPU. And the one I'll be using today is going to be the MSI Ventus 3X Black 5070 Ti. And so to make this as easy as possible, I recommend laying your case face flat down. And I'll meet you guys up there again. All right, guys, so our GPU gets installed in this slot right over here. So we are gonna have to remove some slot covers on the left side, which are being held by screw. Since this express slot is on this section over here, all I have to do is remove the second and the third one. Depending on the thickness of your GPU, you may have to remove a third one, maybe even a fourth one. But on this GPU that I have, it's just two. All right, so with those two screws out of the way, the slot covers come out very easily. And next, we grab our GPU. We want to locate this notch over here. We're going to match that with that notch right over there. And you want to be very gentle and slowly align everything. All right, and once everything is aligned, go ahead and push it in. Now that's connected. And now you're going to grab the same screws you just removed. And you're going to screw your GPU on the left side. All right, next thing here, you're going to grab this anti-GPU sag bracket that's integrated to the case, and you want to slide this all the way to the top. Basically, you want to make sure the GPU is straight. And once you're ready, you're able to just screw that right in to tighten it. We may have to readjust this depending on if there's any type of sag. But I love the fact that this is integrated into the case. And the last thing here is to simply just plug in your power connector, which the one that we just passed through is right over here. So if you're not using streamers, just go ahead and grab this cable and connect it right through. However, since we are going to be using the Lian Li wireless streamers, I'm actually going to connect this right over here. But I will say that the opening on the bottom over here makes it really hard for me to pass this bottom portion of it. I was actually able to squeeze the Lian Li streamer into that small opening by removing the bottom clip. So that way I can pass this through and I can go ahead and reattach this again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this more towards me to give me the most space. And I'm going to reattach that clip. All right, so now I have that reattached. I'm gonna pull this cable a little bit up, just a little bit. And now I'm going to connect the 12 volt high power to the strimmer. Make sure you connect this all the way in. You're gonna notice some 12 volt high power cables are color coded, and that's to ensure that you push the cable all the way in. You're not supposed to see any type of color. So now that's connected in. For now, let's rotate the case real quick. All right, now we have our strimmer cable right over here, and all we have to do is connect it right to our GPU. One last note, if you're gonna be using an MSI graphics card, chances are the top 4 pin is on the opposite side when you originally open this up. So you're gonna have to remove this right angle adapter, flip the whole cable and reattach it so you have the correct orientation. So once you're ready, just go ahead and connect that right in. Push that right in, making sure all the blue color is disappeared. All right, and now this looks much cleaner. All right, perfect. Now, final thing here is rotating the case. And what we're gonna do here is we're gonna do our best to cable manage this as much as we can. There's a lot of Velcro straps over here. Corsair does give you zip ties as well if you want to use zip ties to clean it up. I personally like using the Velcro straps here, so this should be more than enough. And if you remembered this bracket that we removed temporarily, I can actually reinstall this to probably hold some of the wirings as well. So I'm going to cable manage this as best as I can. All right, and after using the Velcro strap and also reinstalling this SSD bracket, I was able to hide a lot of the cables, especially behind this SSD bracket, which the majority of the motherboard connector is located behind. Just remember, we do have the wireless connector, but I'm personally just going to leave it on the bottom. But if you want to use a double-sided tape or adhesive, you can simply just put it right on top of here if that's what you want to do. I'm pretty sure you can do an even better job, but for me, I am perfectly content with how the cable management looks on this case. And so once you're ready, go ahead and grab the back panel, locate the hinges over here, which we're going to re-slide over here. All right, make sure we want to make sure that slides in nice and smooth. To seal it in place, make sure you put the screw on top over here, and that locks in that hinge. And now we're able to just close this completely, hiding all of that chaos. Go ahead and snap it in place, and now we have a beautiful back side. So now let's go ahead and install all of the remaining panels. All right, the next panel I'm going to install is going to be our front mesh panel. And if you guys noticed already, I reinstalled this front glass panel. And I strongly advise you guys do not remove this throughout this whole build, because trying to install this with all the components on here, it is a complete nightmare. It took me almost 2 hours just to finally be able to install this. Very, very difficult. I don't recommend. Make sure you guys keep this intact. I'll let you guys know not to remove this panel. And honestly, since this does open, you still have direct access on the front here just in case. All right, so front mesh panel has an optional filter inside the accessory box. And if you wanted to install this, you just turn this around and you'd be able to just slide this in. This piece over here slides in like this. And then you can just squish this in over here. So this basically acts as a filter for dust. So if you're really concerned about dust, you can definitely install this. However, me personally, I'm not going to install it. I want to have just the maximum airflow, but that is completely optional. So once you're ready, go ahead and position the front mesh over and snap it into place. And just like that, and our front mesh is now fully installed. All right, and here is the final glass panel. There is plastic on the inside. Let's go ahead and remove that. All right, now that we have that out of the way, we are going to have to attach this on the hinge. Let me just angle this a little bit. And so we're just gonna lift this up and apply it over the hinges. And actually, we do have to remove the top panel, so that way we can slide this in. So with the top panel, you're not going to be able to slide this in, so make sure we remove that back. And so be very careful, and then you should be able to slide it down. Now this hinge is reinstalled. Go ahead and grab a screw and screw the top of the hinge over here. All right, and now we should actually be able to install the top panel now. So this was probably the last thing that should have been installed. All right, and the final thing here is to remove any type of plastic pieces you might have. So I'm going to remove this plastic off of the TRYX Panorama screen. And we're pretty much good to go. Let's go ahead and close the front glass. and the side glass panel. Alright guys, and just like that, we have our build completely installed. I'm going to put this in the corner of my desk and fire it up. Alright guys, we're now ready to finally fire this up. If this is your first time building a PC, the only thing that you would need to do is install Windows 11. If you need more assistance and a better guide, I recommend you look it up on YouTube. At the moment, I don't have a dedicated video for that, so I will eventually make a dedicated video, give you guys an in-depth step-by-step guide on how to install Windows. But for now, stay tuned for that video. Let's go ahead and power this on. The only thing you need to do, of course, is make sure your power supply unit is set to the on position. That is set to on, and the power button on the 5400 is going to be right here on the top right. And I'm going to stop yapping and fire this up in 3, 2. Awesome. All right, guys, let's take a quick walk around on the Corsair AIR 5400. I think this build came out absolutely beautiful. Let's open this up. I definitely love how easy it is to open up these glass panels. Just keep in mind that for the side, it's going to stick out a bit. So if you have something over here, it might collide to it. So just be mindful whenever you open up this side glass panel, but it is very easy to do. Now for all the effects that you are seeing currently, all of the fans are going to be using the Lian Li L-Connect software. And then for the TRYX Panorama display, you would install Canali. So that way you can upload your own custom images, GIFs, and all of that good stuff. And you can also download the motherboard software so you can control other RGB elements. Like for example, the MSI Carbon Wi-Fi has the dragon logo that can illuminate any color RGB, as well as our primary M.2. You can see it says right there, Carbon. I think that looks really nice. And then finally, we have the RGB strips for the Dominator titanium. Now, of course, the AIO tubes are blocking the light just a little bit. So if you're using a different type of AIO where you were able to shift the pump more towards the left and have the tubes hidden on top, then you'll be able to see the full RGB effect. But I will say that the benefit of having the TRYX Panorama is that this one comes with a built-in VRM fan. And so the VRM fan will definitely cool off this portion of the motherboard. Since we don't have a fan over here, that could be something that's very optimal as well. Really for those that are interested in overclocking and pushing your CPUs to the limit, for example. But other than that, I think this build came out beautiful. So building in the Corsair AIR 5400 was slightly challenging, especially when it came to reinstalling the plastic piece for the AIO chamber. I highly recommend looking into Corsair's AIO compatibility article that goes over what they recommend in terms of tube length and thickness. The final challenge was reinstalling the front glass that I shouldn't have removed in the first place, and I wish Corsair added a note about that in their manual. Outside of that though, this case is truly unique with the first triple chamber design that separates the CPU, GPU, and PSU for maximum cooling efficiency. I hope I covered almost everything you need to build in this case. I'm a solo creator that does everything from filming and editing, and trust me guys, these videos take a long time to make, so I hope I earned a subscribe from you and gave you the confidence in starting your own Corsair AIR 5400 gaming PC. I want to give a special shout out to MSI for sending their awesome carbon Wi-Fi motherboard, Ventus Black 5070 Ti, and their A1250GL power supply unit. And finally, TRYX for sending their beautiful Panorama 360. Their OLED screen is straight up fire. All components will be listed down below, along with affiliate links that help and support my channel. Thank you guys so much for sticking through the end. And don't forget to hit that subscribe, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Firewolf out.